The folded piece of paper slipped into my hand so smoothly I almost didn't notice it happening. My daughter Iris had been cutting her pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces for the past 10 minutes, barely touching her food, while my husband Marcus dominated the conversation with his usual stories about difficult clients and late meetings. But when her small fingers pressed that note into my palm under the mahogany dining table, something ice-cold shot through my stomach before I even opened it. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "Call 911. He hurt me. Don't let him know." I kept my face perfectly still, kept nodding along to Marcus's story about some partnership deal, but inside I was screaming. My 8-year-old daughter was sitting 3 feet away from me, asking for help in the only way she could think of, and the man she was afraid of was carving his steak like nothing in the world was wrong. My name is Natasha, and before that dinner destroyed my entire understanding of my life, I thought I had figured out how to balance everything perfectly. Every weekday at 7 a.m. I'd drop Iris off at Westfield Elementary before driving 20 minutes to the architecture firm where I'd spent the last 6 years designing commercial spaces that somehow never felt as important as they looked on my portfolio. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced downtown, and I'd gotten into the habit of eating lunch at my drafting table while sketching ideas for the house Marcus and I had been planning to build. After work, I'd pick up Iris from aftercare and we'd stop at the park on Maple Street if the weather was decent. She'd always head straight for the monkey bars, determined to make it across without falling, while I'd sit on the bench answering emails and half watching her progress. Those 45 minutes before we had to go home and start dinner were usually the best part of my day. Iris would tell me about her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, or show me some drawing she'd made during art class, and for that brief window, everything felt simple and manageable. Our house was a 2-story colonial in what the real estate agent had called a family-friendly neighborhood, complete with sidewalks and good schools, and the kind of neighbors who waved when they saw you getting your mail. Marcus had insisted on the upgraded kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, saying we needed space for entertaining clients. But most nights it was just the 3 of us around the dining room table, talking about work and school and weekend plans while Iris pushed vegetables around her plate. I thought we were building something solid, something that would last. If this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. These stories matter more than you know. The changes in Iris started so gradually I almost missed them entirely. It began around her 8th birthday in March, small things that could have meant anything. She stopped asking if she could help me cook dinner, something she'd loved doing since she was tall enough to stand on a stool and stir sauce. She'd come home from school and disappear into her room instead of sprawling on the living room floor to do homework while I worked on my laptop nearby. The first real warning sign came on a Saturday morning when I walked into the kitchen to find Iris making her own breakfast. She was standing on a chair, carefully pouring cereal into a bowl, and when she saw me she got this startled look like she'd been caught doing something wrong. When I asked why she hadn't woken me up like usual, she just shrugged and said she didn't want to bother anyone. But there was something in her voice, this careful politeness that felt wrong coming from a kid who usually chattered nonstop about everything and nothing. Marcus explained it away easily. "Kids go through phases," he said. "She's getting more independent, learning to do things for herself. It's actually a good sign that she's not so clingy anymore." He said it while reading the newspaper, not even looking up, and I wanted to argue but couldn't put my finger on exactly what was bothering me. The second warning was harder to dismiss. I came home early from work one Thursday and found Iris sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, which was normal. But Marcus was standing behind her chair, his hand on her shoulder, watching her write. There was nothing obviously wrong with the scene, but something about the way Iris held herself, perfectly still, barely breathing, made my chest tighten. When she saw me, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, after Marcus went to bed, I tried to talk to her about school, her friends, whether anything was bothering her. She assured me everything was fine, that she was just tired from a math test. But she wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and she kept glancing toward the staircase like she was worried about being overheard. The family dinner that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration. Marcus had just closed a major deal with a tech startup, something that would mean a significant bonus and maybe finally enough saved for the house we'd been planning. He'd suggested we order takeout from that expensive Italian place downtown, set the table with our good china, and have a proper family meal instead of our usual weeknight routine. Iris had been quiet during the drive to pick up the food, staring out the window while Marcus and I talked about vacation possibilities and maybe finally finishing the basement. But I'd attributed her mood to tiredness. She'd had a busy week at school with some kind of science project presentation. Dinner started normally enough. Marcus was animated, talking about the client meeting and how impressed everyone had been with his proposal. I was genuinely happy for him, asking questions about the timeline and what this might mean for his partnership track. Iris sat between us, cutting her food into tiny pieces and occasionally nodding when we asked her about school. But as the meal went on, I started noticing things that made my skin crawl. The way Marcus would reach over to adjust Iris's napkin or tuck her hair behind her ear, gestures that seemed caring but made her freeze completely. How she'd stopped talking altogether except to answer direct questions with single words. The careful way she kept her eyes on her plate, like she was afraid to look at either of us for too long. It was when Marcus got up to refill his wine glass that Iris made her move. Her hand found mine under the table, pressed something small and folded into my palm, then quickly returned to her fork like nothing had happened. The paper felt warm from her grip, and when I carefully unfolded it in my lap, the words hit me like a physical blow. "Call 911. He hurt me. Don't let him know." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw what I'd been missing for months. The way she held her shoulders like she was trying to make herself smaller. The careful distance she kept from Marcus even when he was being affectionate. The haunted look in her eyes that I'd convinced myself was just her getting older. That night, after Marcus fell asleep and I could hear his steady breathing beside me, I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling and trying to process what felt impossible. The note was still hidden in my jewelry box, but I could see every letter of Iris's shaky handwriting burned into my memory. Part of me kept looking for other explanations. Maybe she was confused. Maybe something had happened at school and she was scared to tell us. Maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding that would make sense in the morning. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew. All those small changes, all those moments when something had felt off, but I'd talked myself out of trusting my instincts. The way Iris had stopped climbing into our bed on weekend mornings. How she'd started asking to take showers by herself instead of baths. The careful way she avoided being alone with Marcus, always finding reasons to stay close to me. I thought about every time I dismissed my concerns as overprotective parenting. Every time Marcus had explained away her behavior, and I'd chosen to believe him because the alternative was unthinkable. Every night I'd kissed her goodnight and told her she could tell me anything, never realizing she was already trying to tell me everything. The worst part wasn't the rage building in my chest, it was the guilt. I was supposed to protect her. I was supposed to notice when something was wrong. I was supposed to be the person she could trust to make it stop. Instead, I'd been so focused on maintaining our perfect family image that I'd missed my own daughter's desperate signals for help. But lying there in the dark, listening to the man who'd been hurting my child sleep peacefully beside me, I felt something crystallize that had nothing to do with guilt or confusion. I felt absolutely, completely certain about what I was going to do next. The next morning, I dropped Iris off at school and drove straight to the police station instead of going to work. I'd called in sick, something I never did, and spent the 20-minute drive rehearsing what I'd say. But when I actually sat across from Detective Morrison in that small, windowless room, the words came out jumbled and desperate. I had a note from my 8-year-old asking me to call 911, but no physical evidence, no witnesses, no proof beyond a mother's intuition that something terrible was happening in my own house. Morrison was kind but realistic. Child abuse cases were complicated, especially when they involved family members. They'd need to interview Iris, probably multiple times, and there would be medical examinations and social workers, and a process that could take months. In the meantime, Marcus would need to be informed about the investigation, and there was no guarantee he wouldn't be allowed to stay in the house. My first instinct was to take Iris and leave immediately, pack our bags, and drive to my sister's house in Denver and figure out the legal stuff later. But Morrison explained that removing a child from the state without the other parent's consent could complicate custody arrangements and potentially hurt our case. Everything had to be done carefully legally, with proper documentation. I felt trapped in a system that seemed designed to protect everyone except the person who needed protection most. When I picked Iris up from school that afternoon, she searched my face for some sign that things were going to change, and I had to tell her we needed to be patient a little longer while grown-ups figured out how to keep her safe. That weekend was the longest 3 days of my life. I didn't let Iris out of my sight, insisting she help me with errands and grocery shopping and cleaning projects that kept us busy and together. Marcus seemed annoyed by the sudden change in routine, but he didn't push back. Maybe he sensed something had shifted, or maybe he was just focused on work. But on Sunday night, while I was giving Iris a bath, she grabbed my wrist and whispered that she was scared I wasn't going to believe her. That maybe I'd decide it was easier to pretend nothing was wrong. And looking at my brave, terrified daughter, I realized the system might fail her, but I wouldn't. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening in late April. I'd spent the day setting everything up, contacting my lawyer, arranging for my sister to fly in, even pre-packing a bag for Iris and hiding it in my car. But most importantly, I'd convinced Detective Morrison to let me wear a wire during what I told Marcus would be a conversation about Iris's recent behavior problems. I waited until after dinner, until Iris was upstairs supposedly doing homework, but actually playing quietly in her room with instructions not to come downstairs no matter what she heard. Marcus was in his study, going through client files, when I knocked on the door and asked if we could talk. I started carefully, saying I'd noticed Iris seemed withdrawn lately and asking if he'd observed anything unusual. He gave me the same dismissive responses he'd been offering for months. Kids go through phases, she's fine, I worry too much. But when I pressed harder, when I mentioned that she seemed specifically uncomfortable around him, something in his face shifted. The mask slipped so gradually I almost missed it. First came irritation, then defensiveness, then something colder. He started asking why I was really bringing this up, whether someone had been filling my head with ideas, whether I was having problems that were making me paranoid. His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it that made my hands shake. When I finally mentioned the note, when I told him I knew what he'd been doing to our daughter, he went completely still. For maybe 30 seconds, we just stared at each other across his desk while the weight of everything hung in the air between us. Then he started talking, and what came out wasn't denial or outrage or confusion. It was justification. Explanations about how I was never around, how Iris needed attention I wasn't giving her, how he was just trying to help her feel loved and special. The words were so twisted, so carefully constructed to make his actions sound like care instead of violence, that I felt physically sick listening to them. But I kept the wire recording, kept asking questions, kept letting him reveal exactly who he really was. And when Detective Morrison and 2 other officers knocked on our front door 20 minutes later, Marcus finally understood that his perfect life was over. The legal process took 8 months, but Marcus was arrested that night and never came home again. Iris and I moved into a rental house across town while the lawyers and social workers and therapists did their work. It was smaller than our old place, with thin walls and a kitchen that barely fit a table for 2, but it felt safer than anywhere I'd ever lived. Iris started therapy twice a week with a woman named Dr. Chin who specialized in childhood trauma. I started therapy too, working through the guilt and rage and complicated grief of losing the life I'd thought we had. Some days were harder than others. Some days Iris would have nightmares, and I'd hold her until she fell back asleep, both of us crying. Some days I'd find myself shaking with anger at how long it had taken me to see what was happening right in front of me. But slowly, gradually, my daughter started coming back to herself. She began talking again, really talking, not just answering questions with careful, safe responses. She started laughing at silly things and asking if she could help with dinner and sprawling on the living room floor to do homework while I worked on my laptop nearby. The house we'd been planning to build never happened, obviously. But I found myself sketching different kinds of spaces at work, smaller, simpler designs that prioritized comfort over impression. Homes that felt like refuges instead of showpieces. 6 months after the trial ended with Marcus's conviction, Iris asked if we could get a dog. Something small and friendly that would sleep in her room and keep her company. We adopted a rescue terrier mix named Biscuit who had his own history of being hurt but had learned to trust again. Watching Iris teach him to sit and stay and come when called, seeing both of them heal together, felt like watching a miracle happen in slow motion. A year later, I ran into Marcus's mother at the grocery store. She looked older, frilier, and when she saw me she got this expression like she wanted to disappear. But instead of avoiding me, she came over and said she was sorry. That she'd suspected something wasn't right but had convinced herself she was imagining things. That she hoped Iris was doing better. I thanked her for the apology and meant it. But as I loaded groceries into my car, food Iris had helped me pick out, including ingredients for the chocolate chip cookies she'd asked to make for her class, I realized forgiveness wasn't something I owed anyone. Not Marcus, not his family, not even myself for the months when I'd failed to protect my daughter. What I owed Iris was something simpler and harder, the promise that I'd never again choose comfort over truth. That I'd trust my instincts even when they led me to uncomfortable places. That I'd believe her when she told me something was wrong, even if believing her meant our whole world had to fall apart and get rebuilt from scratch. Sometimes the people who hurt the ones we love most are the people we've trusted to help us love them. But that doesn't mean we have to keep trusting them when the evidence of our eyes and hearts tells us to run. The bravest thing my daughter ever did was hand me that note. The second bravest thing she ever did was trust me to act on it. I hope I never have to be that brave again, but if I do, I hope I remember what real courage looks like. Small hands slipping truth into larger ones, asking for help in the only way they know how.